Chapters 33 and 34 of Napoleon and Marie-Louise, The Fall of the Empire, by Walter Geer. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 33. 1814 to 1815. The Separation. Until his final abdication on the 6th of April, Napoleon did not wish to have Marie-Louise come to Fontainebleau. It was the headquarters of his army, and before the treason of Marmont he had not given up the hope of recapturing Paris by a coup de main. If, on the other hand, the allied sovereigns accepted his abdication in favor of the King of Rome, what value would they attach to the act if they saw the Empress reunited to him? Again, in case he assured the throne to his son by his death by his own hand, how would he have the courage to carry out this project if his wife were there? The day of the 7th of April, which was finally to decide the fate of Marie-Louise, found her in a state of the most painful uncertainty, and almost at the point of nervous prostration. Torn by so many conflicting emotions, she could not make up her mind what course to pursue. Notwithstanding the opposition of Galbois and her entourage, she still desired to rejoin the Emperor, but she was too much habituated to leaning upon others for advice to take any independent action. Finally she decided to send another letter to her father, praying him to give her a place of refuge in his States. "For myself and my son, especially the latter," she wrote, "I am convinced that you do not wish to give him the island of Elba as his only heritage. This unfortunate child, who is innocent of all his father's faults, does not deserve to share with him so sad a position." At the same moment that she thus separates her lot from that of Napoleon, and reproaches him with his errors, she also announces her intention of rejoining him. In conclusion she says, "I am going to Fontainebleau to-morrow morning." But her intention, which was apparently sincere, was frustrated by the arrival of Shuvaloff, an aide-de-camp of the Czar, accompanied by Saint-Aignan, écuyer of the Emperor, brother-in-law of Caulaincourt, and an intimate friend of Madame de Montebello. Shuvaloff announced that he had been appointed Commissioner of the Allied Powers, and that he had orders to conduct the Empress and her son to Orleans. This was a signal for the dispersal of the remaining members of the court. Every one made haste to procure a passport and set out for Paris. After distributing 500,000 francs among her household, and the officers and soldiers of her escort, on the morning of the 9th of April, Marie-Louise left Blois for Orleans. She carried with her the crown diamonds and her own private jewels, while Meneval had charge of the Emperor's sword, in which was set the Regent diamond, now in the Louvre. The princes and princesses of the family, not knowing what else to do, followed, as also a few members of the suite. En route, some of the carriages were pillaged by the Cossacks, but the party arrived safely at 6 o'clock. The following morning, which was Easter Sunday, after Mass, she received Champagny, who had returned from Chanceaux with a letter from her father. He wrote, "I have no fault to find with my son-in-law. On the contrary, I am very grateful to him for the happiness he has given my daughter. I would like, at the price of all my blood, to make you all happy. Such are my paternal feelings toward you. As Emperor I have other duties. I have contracted an alliance with the other sovereigns, and this alliance imposes on me the obligation to accede to their decisions. I do not know what these will be. I have sent Metternich ahead to find out. Whatever they may be, I must adopt them, and assist in their execution, but I shall be in despair at all the misfortune that my son-in-law may experience." On Monday, the 11th April, Metternich arrived in Paris, and that day the treaty was concluded which assigned to Marie-Louise the duchies of Parma, Piacenza, and Guastalla. He wrote to the Empress that this would give her "an independent existence which would pass to her august son; that the best arrangement for the moment would be for her to go to Austria with her son, to await the time when she could choose between the places occupied by the Emperor Napoleon and her own establishment; that she would be tranquil for the moment and free for the future; finally, that everything said to her on the subject of her journey to Austria was in accordance with the paternal intentions of her august father. Beausset, who carried this letter, returned to Orleans by way of Fontainebleau, where he had a long talk with Napoleon. The former prefect of the palace was now one of the strongest adherents of the Bourbons, and his most ardent desire was to combat the return of any sentimental folly. On arriving at Orleans, Beausset also handed Marie-Louise a letter from the Emperor, in which he expressed the hope that she would join him en route for Parma, where he would leave her and their son while he went to Elba to make preparations for their reception. But the letter of Metternich and the comments of Beausset destroyed the effect of the letter from Napoleon. At this moment also, the Empress had been much affected by the news of the robbery of her personal jewels, and of a large part of the treasure of the Crown, and she saw a sure refuge only in the dominions of her father. She therefore welcomed with joy the arrival of Esterhazy and Liechtenstein, sent by Metternich to notify her officially of the arrangement relative to Parma, and to invite her to go to Rambouillet, where she would be met by her father. On the evening of the 12th April at 8 o'clock, the Empress accordingly left Orleans for Rambouillet. She was informed that they had the consent of Napoleon. As a matter of fact, his permission had been asked, but there had not been time to receive his reply. As soon as he heard of this move, of which he entirely disapproved, Napoleon sent Cambronne with a detachment of the Old Guard to escort the Empress to Fontainebleau. But Cambronne, with all possible speed, did not arrive until the morning after her departure. This same day of the 12th April was perhaps the saddest in the life of Napoleon. He had received for his approval the Treaty of Fontainebleau, already signed by his marshals in his name, and later had been advised by a note from Marie-Louise, as well as by a letter from Meneval, that the Empress was leaving Orleans with his son. Up to that moment he had borne all his misfortunes with the greatest fortitude. He had often said that there was no circumstance in life which could justify suicide. To abandon oneself to despair, without a struggle, to commit suicide as a relief, is like leaving the field of battle before we have vanquished the enemy. Yet all that poets sing and grief hath known, of hopes laid waste, knells in that word alone. That night he took a dose of poison which he had carried since the retreat from Moscow. Immediately afterwards he regretted his act and called for assistance. His physician, Yvan, gave him an antidote which soon relieved him. In the morning he had entirely recovered his usual calm self-possession, and during the course of the day he signed the treaty. After an all-night journey, the Empress reached Rambouillet at noon on the 13th of April. During the next 3 days, while awaiting the arrival of her father, she was in constant communication with the Emperor at Fontainebleau. Much of the correspondence was over the question of money. Of the 6 millions which remained of the Crown funds after the pillage and the distribution of $500,000 made at Orleans, Marie-Louise sent the Emperor about 2.5 millions, and, on further demand, another $1,000,000. Then, through Meneval, she sent word that, on account of the needs of her father, she was forced to retain 2 millions, which she promised to remit him later from Vienna. But Napoleon never received this money, any more than ever he received a sou of the allowance of 2 millions guaranteed him under the terms of the Treaty of Fontainebleau. These funds, it should be stated, were not Crown money, but the proceeds of Napoleon's savings from his civil list over a period of 10 years. So the Allies robbed him of his money as well as his throne and his family. Finally, the 16th April, the Emperor Francis arrived, accompanied by Metternich. He was voluble in his excuses and explanations regarding the dethronement of his son-in-law. Detained unfortunately at Chanceaux, everything at Paris had been arranged before his arrival. Without waiting a moment, he wrote the Emperor to obtain his consent for Marie-Louise to visit her family before rejoining him at Elba. In his letter he states that he has found his daughter in poor health, that she needs repose in the bosom of her family, that, restored to health, she will go to take possession of her state, which very naturally will bring her near to the residence of His Majesty. In conclusion he says that it is unnecessary to give the assurance that his son will be treated as a member of the family, and he signs, "Your Imperial Majesty's good brother and father-in-law, Francis." This letter does not agree very well with the one written Metternich 4 days before, in which he said, "The important thing is to remove Napoleon to a distance from France, and please God, may they send him very far. I do not approve of the island of Elba as his residence. Napoleon remains too near to France and to Europe." The itinerary of the journey of Marie-Louise was arranged the same day, but it was necessary to defer her departure until her personal effects could be packed up at Paris — her dresses, her jewels, the cradle of the King of Rome, and all his toys. Reassured by the paternal letter from his father in law, Napoleon raised no objections to the plan. He wrote Marie-Louise frequently during his last days at Fontainebleau, and also at every opportunity on his way to Elba. He was convinced by the letter of Francis, and by the reports of Corvisart, that only her health prevented her from rejoining him at once, and that after a cure at Aix she would come to Elba with his son. He realized that it would be a great proof of her attachment to exchange the court of France for a prison, and he had no wish to constrain her. To Caulaincourt he said, "Let her remain at Parma or Florence. I will only demand of her my son." To this Marie-Louise replied by charging the Duc de Vicence to assure Napoleon of her affection, of her constancy, of her desire to rejoin him as soon as possible, and of her resolution to bring him his son, of whom she promised to take the best possible care. On the 23rd of April the Empress went to Grosbois, where her father came to take leave of her. After resting a day she proceeded to Vienna, by the way of Bâle and Zurich. Besides Madame de Montebello, she had in her suite Beausset, Corvisart, and Meneval. As soon as she crossed the Austrian frontier her journey was a triumphal march. At Schönbrunn she was welcomed by all the members of her family, like the beautiful princess escaped from the cave of the ogre. During the 6 weeks that she remained at Vienna she passed all of her time in the midst of her little French court. She received many letters from the Emperor, to which she replied promptly. She found in her grandmother, Marie Caroline of Naples, an unexpected ally of the Emperor, who told her that she ought to rejoin her husband even if she had to fly in disguise, for "when one is married it is for life." On the 8th of July she set out for Aix, whence she expected to go to Parma, and later to Elba, where the Emperor looked for her in August. She traveled incognito under the name of Duchesse de Colorno, but in the imperial carriages, with her servants dressed in the Napoleonic liveries. Under the pretext that her son would worry her, he was left behind at Vienna. General Comte de Neipperg, who commanded an Austrian division at Pavia, was ordered to meet her at Aix and act as her chevalier d'honneur. Thus, by the express design of the Austrian Ministry, this man, who had frequently crossed her path, entered finally into her intimate life. Neipperg was brought up at Paris, where his mother died in 1783. While a young officer with the Austrian troops in Belgium, he was captured by the French, receiving at the time a sabre stroke which put out his right eye, over which he afterwards wore a black bandage. He served against Bonaparte in Italy in 1797, and again in 1800, and took part in all the subsequent campaigns. In 1810 he was attached to the Austrian embassy at Paris, was presented at the Tuileries, and decorated with the Golden Eagle of the Legion. In November of the same year he was minister to Sweden, where he employed his talents for intrigue to win the adhesion of Bernadotte to the coalition. As minister to Naples in 1813 he secured the signature of Murat to his treasonable treaty with Austria, and it was he who came to the French outposts in April, 1814, to invite Eugène to abandon a desperate cause. In his small sphere he had contributed largely to the downfall of Napoleon, for whom he seems to have felt a profound antipathy. Notwithstanding his 40 years and his black patch, he was irresistible with the women, and had had nearly as many love affairs as Casanova. Such was the man designated by His Holy Imperial Majesty as the guide, chevalier, and companion of his dear daughter, the Archduchess Empress. "Inside of 6 months," said Neipperg to his mistress on leaving Milan, "I shall be her lover, and soon her husband." At Aix, where Marie-Louise occupied the former home of Queen Hortense, she took an active part in all the gay life of the watering place, without a thought for the disasters of France and of the Emperor. She caused so much scandal by her conduct that Talleyrand wrote Metternich that it would be well to recall her. The Emperor Francis took the same view, and she was directed to return to Vienna without going to Parma. After her arrival at Schönbrunn, the Emperor exacted a promise from her that she would let him see all of Napoleon's letters, and later that she would not write any without his permission. This was the end of their correspondence. Thus, little by little, the rupture was brought about. Almost until the end of 1814, the Emperor expected her arrival at Elba, and was occupied with preparations for her reception. Under the date of the 10th of August, Marie-Louise wrote him from Aix that she was commanded by her father to return to Vienna, but she assured him of her love and promised to come later. This was the last letter he ever received from her. During the 100 days, Napoleon wrote the Empress several times, and gave out the report that she was soon to rejoin him at Paris, but all this was for political effect. From the Tuileries a week after his arrival he wrote: "My good Louise, I am master of all France. The people and the army all display the greatest enthusiasm. I expect you during the month of April. Be at Strasbourg between the 15th and 20th of April." Again, on the 4th of April, he said: "I am adored and master of all. I only lack you, my good Louise, and my son. Come, then, at once to rejoin me via Strasbourg." As soon as the news of Napoleon's return was received at Vienna, the allied sovereigns secured from Marie-Louise a formal declaration that she was ignorant of the projects of the Emperor. By way of recompense, she was solemnly assured of the Duchy of Parma, with a revenue of 1,200,000 francs, but the title was for her life only, and not to pass to her son. Thereupon she declared to Meneval that she had "made an irrevocable resolution never to return to the Emperor." At this time she was the mistress of Neipperg, and wholly under his influence. If she had ever loved Napoleon, her love had now turned to hatred. She positively refused to receive or reply to his letters. On the 6th of May Meneval left Vienna and reached Paris 4 days later. The Emperor immediately sent for him, and questioned him for 6 hours. But Meneval was discreet, and did not tell all. Besides, the Emperor did not wish to know all. He realized now the fatal role which she had played in his life, but he was too just to hold her personally responsible. In the future he always spoke of her in the kindest and most affectionate terms. In his final testament he termed her his "beloved spouse Marie-Louise," and wrote, "Up to the last moment I have conserved for her the most tender sentiments." Just a week before his death he said to Antomarchi: "I wish you to preserve my heart and spirits, and take it to Parma, to my dear Marie-Louise. Tell her that I have tenderly loved her, that I have never ceased to love her." With Marie-Louise, Duchess of Parma, we are not concerned. After the death of Napoleon she contracted a morganatic marriage with Neipperg, and after his death another, with Bombelle. By the former she had, before and after their marriage, 3 children, a son and 2 daughters. She died at Parma the 17th of December, 1847, aged 56 years. 34. 1815 to 1832. Napoleon II. On the 22nd of June, 1815, at the Palace of the Élysée in Paris, Napoleon dictated his final act of abdication. At the suggestion of his brother Lucien and Carnot, he added the words: "My political life is finished, and I proclaim my son under the name of Napoleon II, Emperor of the French." This was the inception of the Napoleonic legend. A brilliant writer in a work of extraordinary interest has given us recently his "Reflections" on the legend. Professor Geer is not an admirer of the Emperor, and his comments are frequently as vitriolic as those of Lanfray, but he frankly admits that the "fascination of Napoleon is one of the most striking facts in history, and one of the best established." When the American boys flocked to Paris after the armistice in 1918, the first place that they all wanted to visit was the tomb of Napoleon. Professor Geer says of the legend: "It is on the morrow of Waterloo that the Napoleonic legend truly begins. A thing greater and more beautiful by far than his actual career. Granted that, beneath all his imperial bluff there had been solid achievements, still they were purely material, and constantly obtained at the expense of variety and initiative. The colossal may be mediocre. The legend, on the contrary, has pathos, artistic significance, spiritual grandeur. It is much more than a fairy tale, it is a symbol. And if Napoleon deserves a place in the small pantheon of supreme individualities, it is because, after 1815, he was able to forget his own record, and to collaborate, with splendid artistry, to the elaboration of his own myth. When Napoleon made the change in the phraseology of his act of abdication, he apparently did not realize the étendue of the thought of Lucien and Carnot, for he said to them, "I do not see clearly what you want. They have no more use for the Regency than for me." But later, during the long voyage from Torbay to St. Helena, he had ample time for reflection, and it was then that he began to appreciate the import of the suggestion. At Longwood he rarely spoke of his son, but it was evident to all that the child held the first if not the only place in his heart. He said repeatedly, "It is better for my son that I am here. If he lives, my martyrdom will give him his crown." Such is his secret thought and his hope. It is the only question which deeply interests him. He no longer thinks of himself. "Even if I should leave here," he says, "I should not return to France. My career is finished." In his conversations he often spoke of the future of France. The King could not live long. Would his brother or his nephew succeed him? In his opinion, the elder branch of the Bourbons could not hold the throne for many years. Who would take it then? The Duc d'Orléans or Napoleon II? After considering all the probabilities, he thought that the chances were in favor of the younger branch of Orléans. The dynasty would not seem to have been changed. This sound view more than 10 years before the July Revolution appears almost prophetic, and shows the rare political insight of the man. When O'Meara left St. Helena in July, 1818, he wrote him, "If you see my son, embrace him for me. Let him never forget that he was born a French prince." After this, for the final 3 years of his life we have but few reliable details. A silence like that of the tomb had fallen over his existence. Nevertheless, we are sure that he had the same hopes, the same desires, the same dreams. More and more he was obsessed with the idea that his martyrdom would assure the throne to his son. To him he left in his writings the explanation of his career and of his politics. To him he willed those articles which were most personal to himself, his toilette sets, his arms, his porcelains, his books with the imperial arms. His thought was summed up in the phrase, "My recollection will be the glory of his life." Many historians seem to regard the captivity of Napoleon as the last phase of his career, and nothing more. They overlook the constructive work of the Emperor during the years spent at St. Helena, and its immense service to the tradition. This barren rock in the South Atlantic was the scene not merely of the death of Napoleon, but of the birth of the Napoleonic legend. During the 6 years that he passed at St. Helena, Napoleon received no direct news from his wife or child. If Marie-Louise did not care to write him, that was her affair, but there can be no excuse for the deliberate cruelty of the English government in depriving the Emperor of all news of his son. To the torment of his captivity was added the agony of uncertainty regarding the existence of his child. At Vienna the little King of Rome was never allowed to hear the name of his father, but he never forgot him. When Meneval returned to France, he called to see the boy before leaving Vienna, and asked him if he had any message for his father. In the presence of his governess the child made no reply, but as Meneval was leaving, the little King drew him to one side and whispered in his ear, "Monsieur Meva, you will tell him that I always love him much." This was a year after his arrival at Vienna, when he was 4 years old. One by one all his French attendants were sent home, until no one was left except Madame Marchand, his nurse, who had been with him since the day of his birth. She was only a common peasant woman, but she was much attached to the child, and he loved her dearly. She was humble and faithful, with a true maternal heart, and really the only mother he had ever known. She was the only one who could talk to him of his father, the one remaining link with the land of his birth. Her son was the faithful valet of Napoleon at St. Helena, and through him she managed to send the Emperor a lock of the hair of the little King. On the 27th of February, 1816, she put the child to bed as usual, sat by his side until he went to sleep, and then, by orders of the Austrian government, took her departure for France. When the boy awoke in the morning and found her gone, he understood at once. He made no outcry or complaint, and when the Austrian valet who took her place entered his room, he simply said, "Foresti, I would like to get up." What was the appearance of this son of Napoleon, the second emperor of a dynasty which at his birth dominated more than half of Europe? In his physique he was an Austrian, a prince of the house of Lorraine. As he grew older he bore a striking resemblance to his mother, who was the image of Francis I. The same shape of the head, the same high forehead, the same eyes, nose, mouth, and chin. In his baby pictures painted in France there was a strong resemblance to his father, but in all those executed at Vienna, which are probably truer to nature, he is the living portrait of his mother. In the dozen pictures painted between 1821 and 1831, the last 10 years of his life, the resemblance to Marie-Louise is so marked that no discussion is possible. One of the most interesting of these numerous portraits is the water color of 1831 in the Albertina at Vienna. He is seated in an armchair, over the back of which is thrown a fur pelisse. The future Emperor Francis Joseph is upon his knees, and the Princess Caroline de Salerno is standing by his side. His eyes are a bright blue, his mouth a bow, his blonde hair dressed à la Chateaubriand. He wears a flea-colored coat with a large black velvet collar, a nankin waistcoat, a fine shirt with 3 jeweled buttons, and pearl gray trousers. It is useless to claim that all these artists had accentuated his Austrian traits, as the earlier French painters made him a miniature Napoleon. His aunt, Caroline Murat, who certainly did not love Marie-Louise, attested that these portraits were true to life. Besides, we have the mask made after death, which will be referred to later. To Napoleon he bore not the slightest resemblance, either in form or features. He was very tall, 6 feet 1 inch, English measure, while Napoleon was of medium height, about 5 feet 6. His hair was blonde and wavy, that of Napoleon dark brown and straight. His head was narrow and pointed, that of his father large and beautifully formed. His chest was narrow and poorly developed, that of Napoleon deep and large. Napoleon's eyes were blue-gray, those of his son a bright blue and prominent, as in the case of the mother. His complexion was clear and rosy, that of the Emperor the color of ivory. The Bonapartes were of pure blood, with no hereditary taints, aside from a tendency to cancer, of which Napoleon and 3 other members of his family died. In the generation of Napoleon as well as the following one, the average length of life was over 60 years. All of the males had children, and none of the women was barren. In the House of Austria, of the same degree as Marie-Louise, out of 13 children 3 died idiots, and 5 under the age of 5 years. Of the others, the average life was only 44 years, and only 4 left children. The record of preceding generations was equally bad. Of the 16 children of Maria Theresa, 10 died in childhood, 2 before they were 30, while only 4, of whom 2 were idiots, reached the age of 60. It is evident that eugenics were little understood in the time of Napoleon, or he never would have selected an Austrian Archduchess to be the mother of his son. His child was a Naples Bourbon, with a heritage of idiocy or of tuberculosis. He was condemned before his birth. In his intelligence and intellectual development, it is almost impossible to say whether the son took after his father. He was only 3 years old when taken from France, and every effort was made to mold him into the Austrian form, to destroy in him everything which was French. He was educated as a Habsburg prince. He wore Austrian uniforms and decorations. He was called Francis instead of Napoleon. And in place of his royal title of King of Rome he was known as the Duke of Reichstadt. He was taught in German, and almost forgot his native language, which he never spoke or wrote well. Every effort was made to blot out the memory of his father, and it was years before he knew anything about the career of the Emperor. From his earliest years he was abandoned by his mother, who was living at Parma in open concubinage with Neipperg, and naturally did not care to have her innocent little boy around her. She took no interest in his education or his mode of life. She encouraged him in the innocence of his heart to correspond with her lover, who posed as his mentor and friend. From some of his later letters it is evident that he was familiar with the Memoires dictated at St. Helena, also with the testament in which his father wrote, I enjoin upon my son never to forget that he was born a French prince. He should adopt my motto, Tout pour le peuple français." His ignorance even in the later years of his life, of his father's glorious career, is revealed in a letter of November, 1828, to Neipperg, in which he finds some analogy between the fate of Mack, recently deceased, and that of Napoleon. What a parallel! Mack, who surrendered at Ulm, placed upon almost an equal plane with the great Emperor who received his sword. He must also have known of the treason of Marmont, but he so little appreciated the baseness of the Marshal's act that he welcomed him, not only as a military instructor, but also as a friend, to whom he became much attached. He knew that Napoleon had been a great general, and to imitate him he developed a great taste for parades and reviews. He had seen the portraits of his father on his white Arabians, so he wished to become a finished horseman. With his delicate frame, in which the seeds of consumption were already planted, his exposure in all kinds of weather, and the violent exercise he took, all hastened his end. At the beginning of 1829 his malady was diagnosed, and he knew it. He was forbidden to take any violent exercise, or even to dance, but it was difficult to control him. In July, 1830, a consultation of physicians was held, and the Duke was warned that only the greatest care in a favorable climate could prolong his days. But in May, 1832, after being named colonel en second of a regiment, he took part in all the army manoeuvres, and even in horse races. 2 months later, on the 22nd of July, he passed away at the Chateau of Schönbrunn, near Vienna. After the Great War, a hitherto unknown monument of Napoleon II was discovered in the attic of the Hofburg at Vienna. It was a death mask in plaster placed upon a sculptured bust of life size. The beautiful face with its lines of suffering was well worth a resurrection. The frail form is outlined under the light covering with its golden border. The pitiful chest appears through the fine shirt, with its large open collar. The whole effect is of sleep rather than of death. The sculptor who modeled this chef-d'oeuvre is unknown to fame. The tomb of the Duke of Reichstadt, in the chapel of the Capucins, is familiar to all visitors to Vienna, but until the fall of the Empire permission was never given to photograph the bronze casket in which sleeps the son of the Eagle. The bright rays of the electric light now profane the shadowy chamber in which the tombs are assembled, like the members of a royal family who give an audience. At the foot of the casket of his grandfather, beside that which contains the ashes of his mother, is placed the tomb of the Aiglons. Along the top is a bronze palm in high relief. On each side there are 3 lions' heads, with rings in their jaws. The tomb has never been opened since his death, but we know that the embalmed body is attired in an Austrian uniform. A white coat, blue breeches embroidered with silver, and black morocco riding boots with golden spurs. On the breast are the orders of Austria and Hungary, and a small star of the Légion d'honneur with a red ribbon placed, but not attached, upon the left side of this breast, which had received in its cradle the grand cordon of the order. But the casket does not contain all the mortal remains of this poor body, for the viscera and the heart are elsewhere. Before the funeral, reads the official report, the officers of the prince carried the silver urn which contained the viscera to the vaults of the Cathedral of St. Stephen. The same day, the heart, enclosed in a box of silver gilt, was deposited in the church of the Augustins, near the mausoleum of Marie Christine, the handiwork of Canova. It has been said and repeated again and again that the court of Austria, in all its official acts, never allowed the name of the Emperor Napoleon to appear, but the refutation is to be found here. The inscription reads: Fils de Napoléon, Empereur des Français, salué dès son berceau du nom de Roi de Rome. Here, in the gloomy vault of the Capucins, far from the splendid tomb of his father under the gilded dome of the Invalides, sleeps for all time the poor young Aiglon, whose wings fluttered but a moment, only to be bruised against the bars of fate, and folded silently in resignation and death. Et maintenant, il faut que ton Altesse dorme. Dorme au fond du caveau, dans la double prison de son cercueil de bronze et de cet uniforme. Dors, mais rêve en dormant que l'on t'a fait revivre. et que, laissant ton corps dans son cercueil de cuivre, j'ai pu voler ton cœur dans son urne d'argent. Rostand, L'Aiglon. End of Napoleon and Marie-Louise. The Fall of the Empire by Walter Geer. Recorded by Céline Major. Thank you for listening.